Well, it's finally happened, folks. We're now recording the podcast once again. I know it's been a while, but a lot of things have occurred over the last few weeks. I got done with my college semester. I still have a little ways to go, but we're getting closer and closer to the graduation step. Finally. The second biggest thing that has happened to me over the last couple of weeks is I was involved in a car accident. My car is being totaled out, unfortunately, but overall I'm fine. I had a couple of bruises, nothing major. I'm just thankful to be in one piece. And just for reference, no, I was not the one who caused the accident. Some lady hopped off the freeway and hit my car. Final destination stuff, but I'm just glad to be here right now. So, if everything's gone accordingly, you heard my new intro song. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let's go ahead and jump right into what you guys more than likely came here for, and that's to talk about Magic the Gathering as a game. Obviously, since the last time I recorded, we didn't have Dominaria out as a set. I've been looking over the set, I've been playing with the set. I do have a standard deck going on right now, which is not a first in a while, but I'm just glad to have a standard deck at the moment. Initially, looking at the set, I thought there were quite a few playables, modern-wise, but now having played with the set and everything's kind of gotten used to it, I think I've narrowed down my modern playables, at least to a top 4 list. So I'm going to kind of quickly go over that list for you guys, and let's see if we're almost on the same page or somewhat similar to the same page. First and foremost, I want to talk about Shalai, Voice of Plenty. It's a creature 4-drop angel, 3 colorless, 1 white. She's a flying 3/4. To summarize her abilities, she basically gives you, planeswalkers, and other creatures you control hexproof. And then for 4 colorless and 2 green, she'll put a 1/1 counter on every creature you control, including herself. So the reason why this card is great is it slides into immediately all creature toolbox decks. So you're looking at Naya Company, you're looking at different Coco Company variants, you're looking at the Vizier deck that uses Devoted Druid, because now that effectively has another way that they could just make their field wide. They don't strictly have to rely on Ronus or Walking Ballista anymore. On top of which, if they do run the One of Shalai main, they, in theory, I'm not saying it's 100% shoo-in, but in theory can get rid of Galvani Township main and replace that with a basic, or replace that with another duel that the deck could use. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I like Galvani Township as a land, but if I could have that ability on a creature and effectively use it as many times as I want because it doesn't have to tap, even better for me as a creature toolbox player. Not to mention, Shalai as a creature gives them a better advantage against decks like Burn. Now Burn is forced to use 2 burn spells minimum just to deal with Shalai, and that's obviously if they haven't gone infinite just by pumping Shalai up, or even if they have the opportunity to just pump Shalai up once or twice, they still have to use multiple burn spells on this one card to deal with it. Plus she can be corded out or searched out via other ways in the deck. Obviously, you can just Duskwatch Recruiter infinitely until you hit Shalai, but if you're doing that, you might as well just, obviously go for the win. But as a card, she's very solid. Most creature toolbox decks are running her as a 1 of main or 1 of side. I have seen some creature toolbox decks online run her as a 2 of main. It is a very distinct option. Only problem is, for a core deck to utilize her to the best of their ability, they need to possibly cut down on Collected Companies. Collected Company does not hit Shalai, and that is a bit of a problem, but that's kind of, again, why you can just quarter out of the deck or search with her with Duskwatch Recruiter if you need to, or so on and so forth. Overall, I think Shalai is a very solid card for the deck, and if you are playing creature toolboxes, I would suggest maybe picking up a couple, especially while they're somewhat cheapish. Given the time, and once this card catches on, I think this card will spike up to maybe at least $10 in price. The next 2 cards I want to talk about are, one was at least a surprise for Modern, and the other one hasn't seen play in Modern just yet, and that is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and then Karn, Scion of Urza. Now, with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, that was a bit of a surprise to me. I didn't expect that to be as prevalent in Modern as, say, any other control walker. Obviously, he's a 5-drop walker. Generally, 4-drop or 3-drop walkers are where we want to see our walkers in Modern, and you rarely ever see a 5-drop walker in Modern. Well, Teferi has now made that call. He has made it into variants of Jeskai Control, or Jeskai Burn as some other people may call it. He's also made it into Blue-White Control. Now, people have started replacing some number of Jace the Mind Sculptor for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. They usually cut 2 Jace or cut 3 Jace to put in 2 or 3 Teferi. Some people are even forgoing running Jace the Mind Sculptor for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, completely. Now, if you're not familiar with what Teferi does, I'm just going to quickly summarize it. +1, draw a card, and then at your untap step, untap 2 lands. -3, put a non-land card into its owner's library, third from the top, and then -8, you get an emblem whenever you draw a card. You may exile a permanent an opponent controls. Now, with Teferi, the reason why I think he's very good in Modern, and some people really aren't understanding this, is the fact that he clears up a spot for you that Jace was kind of taking up. And you're maybe wondering, well, what was Jace taking up? Well, Jace was taking up the precious 4-drop slot that Modern Control needs. Modern Control needs that precious 4-drop slot for board wipes such as Settle the Wreckage, Wrath of God, Supreme Verdict, so on and so forth. They also need that precious 4-drop slot for Cryptic Command. Jace takes up that slot, and yes, he is a great win condition, but often in the format right now, that 4-drop slot is needed for a control package and not a win con. So Teferi opens up that slot. Not to mention Teferi's +1, even after you tap your opponent's field down or in the best situation, wipe your opponent's field, his +1 untaps 2 lands. So if your opponent's playing aggro for whatever reason, you're able to just slam a Snapcaster Mage immediately or untap and slam another creature with flash onto the field and protect Teferi with his +1. The only issue I see with Teferi is his emblem isn't as much of a win con as, say, Jace's. Yes, it is amazing wiping your opponent's field and just exiling all their permanents, but the issue with that, to me at least, is it doesn't outright win you the game as a control player. Yes, you're now drawing, let's say, 3 cards or 4 cards, and eventually you're going to make your opponent either scoop or your opponent's going to get lucky and they're just going to go and get you with a haste creature if you're playing a red deck or burn you out, but that's what the rest of the control package is for, right? The only issue with that is people still haven't quite adjusted to Teferi just yet. I've seen quite a few control players, at least online, just slam down the Teferi after they wipe the field, and then they don't really leave up enough mana to counter the next thing, which is odd because you have the 2 mana there. And I think people are just F6ing after they wipe the field, not expecting just like an immediate crackback to potentially either kill Teferi or just kill them outright. And that's a major issue. So with me, I think Jace is obviously the more solid of the win con out of the two. At least in the control package, I would run maybe 2 Teferi, 1 Jace, or 2 and 2. I think that's the split you want to go with. And with the 2 obviously cut Jace, now you're replacing those with Teferi, and you may want to attempt to slide in another Cryptic Command or another Settle the Wreckage, another Supreme Verdict, just something that says to control the field a bit more. Something that just says they're not getting through. That's just the way I see it currently. I do see a lot of people not really even using Teferi's -3 just yet, and it's just funny. So his -3 effectively reads, put any card 3 from the top of the library. So if you want to -3 and put your Snapcaster Mage 3 from the top, you're able to do so. You're able to reutilize Detention Spheres or save your Jace potentially at the cost of your Teferi, or other things to that effect. As long as it's not a land permanent, you're able to effectively save it, which is just, I think, a bonus at this point. Granted, it's not the most effective use of his -3. You're more than likely want to bounce their win condition back into your opponent's deck or lock them out a couple of turns, make them reset some things. There's better uses for his -3, obviously, but that's just a little combat trick to keep in mind that you could potentially do with his -3. And maybe I'm just oversimplifying Teferi at this point with his -8 emblem versus Jace's ult, but I think Jace's ult in the long run is a more solid finisher compared to just straight up Teferi's ult. Teferi's ult, obviously you need to draw cards, and you may or may not have cards in your deck left to draw at that point, or to get momentum going. There's also the fact that Jace just exiles the grave and deck and replaces it. So in theory, what you can do is you can combo them both. I mean, if you wanted to, you can combo Jace's ult with Teferi's ult, get rid of their deck, get rid of their graveyard, put their hand back as their new deck now, and then you just start exiling their permanents. So they basically gotta hope whatever's in their hand is the finisher and the key finisher to killing you. I think that's the potential way to run it. So maybe in the future it might be whittled down to a control package of 1 Teferi or 2 Teferi versus 2 Jace to 1 Jace. Some sort of ratio. I think 3 walkers or 4 walkers I think is the key to some sort of Jeskai control or Azorius control deck in the future. But right now with Teferi's price being at $40, I don't think that's just a standard price. I think obviously you're seeing the modern kick back into it. When you compare this to Karn, though, Karn Scion of Urza, I think he's going for roughly $70 in Standard right now, and that's a bit of a problem. Not just for Standard players who need to get 3 or 4 Karns for any deck that they're running, but for the fact that Karn's not really seeing play in Modern right now. So that one's just an exclusive Standard price. Now, I'm not saying Karn won't see play in Modern. Not in the slightest. The fact of the matter is Karn is amazing card draw, period. His Neg-1 allows you to get any card from exile that has a silver counter on it. His +1 makes your opponent give you 1 card and then the other card goes into exile. And then his Neg-2 gives him a blocker that is just XX, where X is the number of artifacts on the field. So obviously he's a very specific card. He's only going to fit into a number of decks. Like Lantern Controller Affinity, that's probably going to be his home in the future once those decks decide to make it his home. That is the key factor with him. And I don't think a lot of people have noticed that just yet. Obviously, once Standard rotates and he leaves Standard, I think his price will fall back down to 40 into the range of Teferi, but I think he will make it into Modern. And it's also, just like Teferi, key to point out that if for whatever reason you have 2 Karns in your deck and you manage to start drawing cards with one and they kill your other Karn, and you still have some cards in exile, you could slam down your other Karn and immediately minus him to draw some value out of your silver pile, is what I'm just going to call it, your silver pile. So since you're able to get such value, especially in Affinity or when you need the value in, say, Lantern Control, I think Karn has potential in those 2 decks to not bring them back to the forefront because Affinity's already there, and Lantern Control has kind of died down, so I think Karn has the ability to eventually bring that back into the forefront of control. You could argue that Clan Ironworks can use an additional just something extra, and maybe Karn might even fit into that deck, but that's just, I think, a 50-50 right now. And I'm only saying those 3 decks exclusively so you could use his minus ability to the best of his value. Now, if you just put Karn into any old deck, he fits just the same slot as Jace does, and if any deck has a 4-drop that they need to utilize, more so than Karn, they will, but Karn is a card-drawing engine. I'm not saying he will eventually win the game for you, but since he is a card-drawing engine in decks that don't necessarily have a card-drawing engine, or a way of filtering out stuff that they don't want, I guess it's kind of hard to put into words. I'm not saying that he's amazing in a lot of Modern decks, but he does fit the slot that a lot of Modern decks need. And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to hit with Karn, and that's why I think he has potential, especially in Modern, to make waves. It's just a matter of time until we see the correct deck with him. And I think that's what we ultimately want for him, is the correct deck. The last major card out of Dominaria I kind of want to hit on is obviously the card that everyone was very hyped about, and that was Dampening Sphere. If you don't know what Dampening Sphere does, I'm going to kind of summarize that for you. Any land that would tap for more than 1 mana of its chosen color and instead produces 1 colorless. So the main example I'm going to use right now is a very famous card. It's called Gaia's Cradle. Gaia's Cradle produces green mana equal to the number of creatures you control on the battlefield. So if I slam down Dampening Sphere, Gaia's Cradle doesn't produce more than 1 colorless mana instead, period. So Gaia's Cradle effectively is nuked, and they won't gain a lot of mana. That card in itself is amazing, and I would think it would be more than just like $1.50 or $2 right now. But to my knowledge, it really hasn't made a splash into Modern, and you think there's a lot of decks out there that can just slam this into their sideboard as sideboard hate against Tron and against Storm, and it hasn't. It hasn't hit those sideboard slots yet. I don't even really think they've hit legacy slots yet. This card, I think, is severely underrated currently, and it was super hyped up to begin with. I think initially it was going for almost $15, and then over the last few weeks, it's just dropped until we finally hit like $1 or $2. Have actually started picking up multiple playsets because eventually this card will spike, and once it spikes, this card will be worth $10, so on and so forth. I would recommend you picking up your playsets now. This card is not gonna be cheap in the future, just like Fatal Push. It's obviously not a mythic uncommon like Fatal Push is. I usually see people opening up 2, maybe 3 of these cards per box, and I think it was kind of designed as such, like this hate card just needed to be that popular. I personally would have preferred if this card was a rare, because then maybe this card would have saved itself and landed itself right around $5. But being an uncommon, I think, is fair. I do hope that we start seeing this card pick up a bit more play in Modern. but I'm not holding my breath. I know it'll eventually will happen, and the same thing will happen for Legacy. There are so many cards in Legacy that produce more than just 3 mana in Tron. Like Gaia's Cradle, for example, produces more than 3, and there are other cards that do something like Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, so on and so forth. Anything in Eldrazi that can produce more than 2 mana, this card will nerf. It slows them down quite a bit, and it allows you to stabilize in the long run. So I think it's a matter of time before we see Dampening Sphere, especially see play in Legacy. But again, it's just a wait-and-see sort of moment. Now, I did have a lot of high hopes for Dominaria. I'm not just talking about Standard, obviously. I had a lot of high hopes for Dominaria Modern-wise. There were quite a few cards that screamed Modern to me that just haven't hit yet, and maybe we'll see them start to pop up in some variants. So this is kind of just like a minor list, but I think Marwyn the Nurturer might see play in Elves. Squee the Immortal has the potential to see play in Skred. I would also like to say Bayard, Steward of Argive, has the potential to see play in Death and Taxes, and obviously Wizard's Retort and Wizard's Lightning has additional play to see some sort of like Wizard Tribal Synergy, or is it Burn or is it Control? Now, a lot of people, not in my local area, but a few people have said, well, why aren't the Sagas seeing play? And as someone who plays Modern religiously and has literally 90% of all the Modern decks currently in a collection, I would say that's all the Sagas. It doesn't even matter if it's History of Benalia. All the Sagas are super slow, and I would say they're almost exclusively for Standard. There are 2 like enchantment decks that come to mind, like Boggles and then like Pillow Fort in Modern. And none of those decks have the potential to really utilize any of the Sagas to their fullest ability. I would say the Sagas are too slow, and as soon as like they get ready to start rotating out of Standard, I think it's safe to say you better unload all your Sagas. Because once rotation happens, all those Sagas are going to plummet, especially History of Benalia. I think that card's sitting at like $20 right now. Even out of rotation, once Amonkhet and once Kaladesh happen, I think Benalia will eventually drop. Obviously, it depends on what we see in Core, and it depends on what we see in Ravnica. Since we're not going to have the Orzhov Guild immediately out of the gate, instead we're going to have the Azorius Guild, I really don't see History of Benalia spiking up too much. Yes, Azorius is there to start, but I think History needs white-black more than it needs white-blue, or it needs white-red comparatively. I think white-red or white-blue are the better fit, considering the Azorius have knights or law mages, and obviously white-red has a lot of knights in the Boros Legion, or those guys have soldiers as well, comparatively to, say, Orzhov, who just mainly have like spirits and clerics and stuff like that. But it's currently seeing play in a white-black deck in Standard, which is what I'm playing right now. I'm playing Orzhov Vehicles in Standard, and the deck's doing fairly well. But again, there's a lot of things that are up to rotation, and it's up to Core to see what hits in Core. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of reprints. We may see like 28 new cards or whatever, maybe 50 new cards, and the rest are going to be exclusively reprints that Magic needs to have happen. But as of right now, I think the Sagas, going back to what I mentioned earlier, are not Modern worthy. So just as like a little pro tip, I would get rid of your Sagas, especially as Dominaria gets closer to rotation. I would realistically only keep Dampening Sphere, for sure keep Teferis, for sure keep Shalai, maybe keep Karns. Those would be my 4 keeps for sure, and then look at where Modern is going and see if any of those other cards have the potential to make Modern. If they do, maybe get a couple of them or get a playset here or there and stock up on what you think may or may not see play in Modern. I do want to make the quick mention, outside of Dampening Sphere, Legacy didn't really see a lot of love with Dominaria, to my opinion at least. It didn't see a lot of love, and granted, Dampening Sphere is just going to affect all formats until it rotates. But Legacy hasn't really seen a lot of love lately. I think the format's not necessarily getting stale, but I figure the format's kind of like in this awkward place where Grixis Delver's the top deck, or other decks are starting to kind of battle it out, and they're having a hard time dealing with X, or they're having a hard time dealing with Y. I think Legacy, at least when Standard comes from the next core set, or once we go to Ravnica, I think Legacy needs a little bit of love. And ironically enough, I do think we saw a little bit of love with Battlebonds as a whole. Now with Battlebonds, none of the cards can be played in Modern, none of the cards can be played in Standard, none of the cards can be played in Brawl. The cards are almost all exclusively Legacy, EDH, and Vintage. Now, I think there were 3 cards that caught my eye initially when it comes to those particular formats. The first of which I think is the biggest, like, wow to me, and that is Academy Rector. If you're not familiar with Academy Rector is a 4-drop creature, 3 colorless, 1 white. When it dies, search your deck for a Planeswalker card and put that card into play, and it is a 1/2, so it's super easy to kill. You generally lay this thing on the field and chump block with it if you can, or you lay this thing on the field and then just wait for your opponent to wrath or whatever they need to do. And then eventually, just by their own means, 9 times out of 10, this thing will die and you'll get a free Planeswalker out of it. It's been calculated that with the optimal hand, you could have Academy Rector out on turn 1, and on turn 1, potentially just straight up kill Academy Rector and drop Karn on turn 1 in Legacy, or drop Ugin on turn 1, or so on and so forth. So imagine you're going up against Show and Tell, right? And Show and Tell plays Emrakul, and they, for whatever reason, they don't take the extra turn. Well, you can drop Academy Rector, and if they don't get rid of Academy Rector immediately, you can just sack 6 permanents. Academy Rector's trigger is on the stack. You then search your deck for Karn, slam Karn on the battlefield, and then next turn, neg3, exile their Emrakul, or do whatever you need to potentially win the game at that point. So Academy Rector as a whole has a lot of potential as a card. I think it's going for like $30 right now, at least on Star City. Once Battlebond hits, it may drop, it may spike. Obviously, cards like this are very hard to tell by, but usually it's safe to assume that anytime the card has the word Rector in the name, the card's very worth playing in Legacy, it's very worth playing in EDH, very worth playing in Vintage, and cards like this will make you a very nice mint in the long run. Another card very similar to this, I would say, is Stunning Reversal. Now, Stunning Reversal, if you haven't seen the card, is a 4-drop, 3 colorless, 1 black, and is an instant. The next time you would lose the game, this turn instead draw 7 cards, and your life total becomes 1. In Legacy, this will save you against everything, even including Infect for a split second, because Infect works on damage. So once you have 10 Infect, if you play this, it'll stop you from losing the game. Your life total becomes 1 and effectively stops the Infect trigger that turn, so then they have to wait another turn to do anything. And now you've just drawn 7 cards. Even on your opponent's turn, let's say you have a grip of 6. You've just drawn 7 cards. You don't have to discard at the end of your opponent's turn. You now have 13 cards in hand to do something with. If you can't win with that 13, 14 cards in hand, then you probably weren't destined to win the game at all, period. It does exile itself, so obviously you can't abuse this card with Snapcaster Mage, but overall I think this is a very solid card. I think it's worth stocking up on, especially for EDH purposes, but I do think Legacy, you will see this card somewhere. It just screams incredibly powerful card to me, and it is. I really enjoy the card. The artwork on it's amazing, and Black doesn't get an ability like this very often, where they can't lose the game for the turn. Usually with Black, it's they immediately lose the game or they can't win the game, like with Immortal Coil or Abyssal Persecutor. Those cards say that they can't win the game, or upon losing all the cards in the graveyard, they lose the game, something to that effect. I think, to my knowledge, this might be one of the few Black cards where they say that you, as a player, can't lose the game, plus you draw 7, and your life total becomes 1. So as long as you're not versing a burn deck, and they have like 1 mana open, or they have like 1 card and it's like a free burn spell, like a gut shot or something, you potentially will win the game next turn after drawing 7 cards, which isn't too bad if you ask me. The last card I kind of want to mention is just a much-needed reprint for Legacy, and that is True Name Nemesis. In this format, in Double-Headed Giant, they kind of picked the right time to reprint this card. This card needed to have a reprint. It does well in Grixis Delver, and Merfolk effectively used this card as well. And since both decks are so popular in Modern, this card was, I mentioned before, much needed reprint. The reason why they put this in Double-Headed Giant or in Battlebond is because you can only name 1 player. So the other head is free to deal with True Name Nemesis as they see fit, whether it be a kill spell, bounce spell, something like that. And I get why they reprinted this card in this set. So you won't hear any argument from me. I might pick up a playset finally, now that they're probably going to drop. I think they were sitting around like $30, and I figured they'll probably drop to around half that price. Now, if you open up a foil one, this will be the first time that True Name Nemesis will be foil. So obviously, if you open up a foil one, it might be like $150, give or take. The foil price for that card will be ridiculous, as will the foil price for many of these cards. It'll be a first foiling printing for a lot of these cards, so keep that in mind if you do open Battlebond. Now, I already have my partner for the midnight release of Battlebond, or whenever my local store decides to do their Battlebond event. I do have my partner ready for that, and I think it's going to be a great time. Now, a lot of people are calling this effectively EDH Masters, and I get why. When you look at all the reprints, at least value-wise, that came out of the set, it's ridiculous. So aside from True Name Nemesis, you have Doubling Season Land Tax, Core Spirit Dancer, Chain Lightning, Sour of Temptation, Baganda of Condor, Seaborn Muse, Vigor, Swords to Plowshare, Spell Snare, Sky Shroud's Claim, Microsynth Lattice, Mind's Eye, Nakara Revenant, and Greater Good. All those cards saw reprint within this set. Now, a lot of the value cards in this set are in green, so if you open up a green rare, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be worth a lot. But a lot of the other colors didn't really see as much love as they needed to. I'm all for doing reprints, but when you look at the set as a whole, you have Arena Rector speculation, and then you have my own personal speculation in Stunning Reversal. I think those two cards will be the potential big hitters out of this set as a first time and possibly only time printing. But outside of those two cards, we have a lot of reprints. And the reprints, again, are worth money, but I would have loved to seen a few more cards that have never been printed before in this set that may be worth a little something. I like the 2 walkers in the set, but obviously the 2 walkers are going to go into EDH, or they're just going to be for Two-Headed Giant. They're not going to make a splash like they needed to. You have cards like Archfiend of Despair or Brightling. Those cards are seeing first-time printings, but those cards outside of this set really aren't either A, that good, or B, worth anything. If I opened up an Archfiend of Despair in Two-Headed Giant, that seems like a great finisher. But if I open it, if I'm just like casually opening packs, trying to crack packs for value, one, I'm doing things wrong. You shouldn't do that. But if you decide to do that, and you get an Archfiend of Despair over, say, Stunning Reversal, or you get a Brightling over, say, Land Tax, you're not going to be too happy. Even if you get the full versions, a lot of these cards will not be worth a lot of money. And I know that money is not the reason why this set was made. The set was made for Two-Headed Giant. You could argue, say, the set was made so they could finally have a set to reprint True Name Nemesis in and have it be completely fair. But it's just an issue, I think, right now that the set had a lot of individual cards that saw printing for first time, and a lot of those cards are kind of underpowered outside of, again, Arena Rector and Stunning Reversal. I think they could have powered up a few of the other cards, and maybe I'm just overlooking things. But overall, as a whole right now, that's kind of just how I feel, is a lot of the cards that are seeing first-time printings within the set are kind of underpowered compared to the power that we actually have. And I know they're doing this as a sealed environment and possibly as a draft environment if people decide to draft this set and then go Two-Headed Giant with it. But overall, as a whole, I think the set is very solid. It does kind of remind me of the first time Conspiracy was printed. It was a very solid set. I really hope to see Battlebond 2 or Conspiracy 3 in the future and them both succeed. So that's kind of like the last little thing about at least the Dominaria and Battlebond that I want to touch on. Especially Battlebond until I have the chance to play it and see how the format is. I really think Battlebond has the potential to be an amazing format. And obviously Core is just right around the corner, but 90% of Core is going to be reprints. So it's just going to be what cards do we expect in Standard, or what cards are we hoping for in Standard, or possibly even what returning mechanics will we see in Standard for the next year. So Core obviously is going to be a big part of Standard, but it's not going to be something that we're heavily focused on, I guess, is what I'm trying to go for. It's not going to be something that we haven't seen before. Like I said, 90% of the cards are going to be reprints. The other 10%, if they do even that, are going to be new cards. And yeah, the new cards aren't usually that great, but again, it's Core, so it's a brand new Core set. Maybe we'll see something. Who knows? The last thing I kind of want to touch on before I take off is Pro Tour Dominaria is officially happening this weekend. I hope that you guys are able to watch it. I know I'm going to try to watch it. Unfortunately, I have a double shift Friday and Saturday for work, so I'm not going to be able to watch like the first half of the Pro Tour, but I think when I'm not working, I'm going to hopefully be able to catch like a game or just some highlights on my phone or something. Personally, I think there are quite a few decks in Standard right now that have the chance to do a lot. Obviously, there's Blue-White Control as a variant. There's Golgari Constrictor. There's 2 different red decks that have the potential to do a lot. There's Orzhov Vehicles. There's a lot of top-tier Standard decks right now. I kind of wish there was a combo deck so all the decks can be represented, but I don't think there is a successful combo deck right now. Maybe we'll get something when Core hits. but I hope you are able to pay attention to the Pro Tour. I know when I have the chance, I'm going to try. But other than that, it's great to be back. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Expect more in the future. I do want to get some more guests on this summer, and as I start to record more and more, we'll get back in the groove of things, and it'll be excellent, I hope. So just remember, I do have a Twitter. You can follow me at MTG-Eternities. I'm also on YouTube, MTG-Eternities. You can find my archive there. I have every single episode posted if you decide to listen to some of my older content. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe there, or follow me on Twitter. Or if you want to just send me a message, I'm very responsive. Especially if you have just some questions about my opinion. I'm always down to just discuss things and see where things take us. So with that in mind, all lines of thought are open for all Magic Seekers. This is your host from MTG Eternities, back again, signing out.